So good morning and welcome to Ceramic Storytime. We've had some technical difficulties this morning and I'm using new technology so I can share my screen with you. And so this is only my second time trying this program. And so last week the video wasn't working properly, and this week I couldn't get the audio working before. Now the audio is working, but the video doesn't look great. But I think I'm just gonna have to, let's see. I think I can change the resolution of the video. Let's see if that helps. So I'll just wait for, yeah, that looks a little bit better. Okay, so I'm gonna get started. So today we are going to talk about witness cones. So if you want to follow along, I'm going to be reading my blog post called Temperature versus Heatwork, Why We Use Witness Cones. So I'm just going to share my screen with you here. And so if you go to bit.ly/witness cones, then that will take you to my website and the post that I'm going to read to you today. Okay, so yeah, we've fixed the audio, we've fixed the video, sort of, and thank you all for your patience. And I'm gonna get started by reading this blog post. And so as I go along, feel free to ask questions in the comments, and then I will answer your questions as I go. Okay, here we go. So, temperature versus heatwork, why we use witness cones. So if you go to my website, if you want to download this blog post as a PDF, you can do that. You just have to click this link here and then enter your email address, and then I'll send you a PDF of this blog post for your files. So let's get started. I receive a lot of glaze questions, and the first question I generally ask in return is, what did the cones look like? This is because knowing whether the kiln was over or under fired is important for diagnosing many glaze issues. Sometimes I'm told a kiln temperature in response, but knowing what temperature your kiln reached is only part of the story. Seeing the physical witness cones from your firing gives you a much more accurate description of what happened to your clay and glazes. I put at least one cone pack holding 3 witness cones in every firing. Occasionally, I'll put a cone pack on each shelf. Cones provide valuable information about each firing, and it's really difficult to troubleshoot firing issues without them. You never know when you'll need them until it's too late. It's good practice to put witness cones in every firing regardless of temperature or type of kiln. In this article, I describe the difference between temperature and heat work. It's because of this difference that using witness cones is essential to understanding your glaze results. So, what are cones? Pyrometric cones are small cone-shaped objects that are made of ceramic material and designed to start melting and softening at specific temperatures. I put temperatures in air quotes, temperatures, because it's not completely accurate to say a specific cone will melt at a specific temperature. It would be more accurate to say that cones are designed to measure heat work, which takes both temperature and heating time into account. More on heat work in a minute. So here's an example of what cones look like. They come in different sizes, large and small, which serve different purposes. So we've got small kiln sitter cones. The small cones go into the manual kiln sitter kilns. These kilns have switches and dials, or switches/dials that you turn up and down to control the temperature of the firing. A small cone is propped onto 2 cone supports inside the kiln with a sensing rod laying over the center. So in this picture, these are the cone supports, and then this is the cone, and then this is the sensing rod laying over the center of the cone. As the kiln approaches its target temperature, the cone in the kiln sitter will soften. As the cone softens, the weight of the sensing rod causes it to bend, like this. The sensing rod goes from the inside of the kiln to the outside. On the outside, there's a claw on the end holding a latching mechanism. So this here is the claw, and then this is the latching mechanism. So when the latch is up and being held by the claw, the kiln can be turned on. Once the latch falls down, the kiln shuts off. When the sensing rod sinks down into the cone, the claw on the outside starts to rise. When the claw rises up, it releases the latching mechanism, which falls down and shuts the kiln off. It's kind of genius, really. So let's see if this will play. Here's my video of the kiln sitter falling and that familiar sound that we all love to hear. So those are small witness cones, and those are only used in kiln sitter kilns. Then we have large witness cones. So the other type of cones we have are larger, and we call them witness cones because they essentially witness the amount of heat work our clay and glazes have been subject to. This gives us a visual representation of how the firing went. You can buy self-supporting cones that stand up on their own, or you can buy regular large cones, and you can make cone packs by standing cones up in a lump of clay, like this here. So this is the self-supporting cone, and then this is a cone pack that I made out of a lump of clay. And then you can also buy reusable cone holders, but I have always just made my own. Ideally, you would place witness cones somewhere that you can see them by looking through a peephole during the firing. So here is my cones through my peephole on my kiln. When you see the cones bending, you know the firing is reaching its peak temperature. This allows you to make sure your kiln doesn't shut off too early or too late. I generally put 3 witness cones in my firings. 1 for my target temperature, 1 cone below, and 1 cone above. So in a cone 6 glaze firing, I would normally use cones 5, 6, and 7. In this picture, I'm using cone 4 only because that's the cone that I had. So I didn't have any cone 5s, but I had cone 4s. So when you use a cone 4, it just gives you an earlier kind of heads up that your kiln's about to reach temperature. And so when the cone 4 starts bending, then I know that it's not going to be long before the cone 6 starts bending. So, but generally I would use a cone 5, 6, and 7. So cone 5 is the guide cone. It starts melting first. When cone 5 starts to bend, you know the firing is approaching its peak temperature, and you can get ready for the cone 6 to start bending. Cone 6 is the target cone. This is the cone that you want to be perfectly bent so the tip is pointing down. That's when the firing is complete, and you can shut the kiln off if it doesn't shut off automatically. And then cone 7 is the guard cone. If you don't happen to be watching your cones as they bend and then your kiln overfires, the guard cone, the guard cone will tell you if it's way overfired or only slightly overfired. So here are some examples of some fired witness cones. So this one here, I would say is slightly underfired. This one I would say is perfect because you've got your tip of the cone that's pointing downwards. So on this one, the cone 6 is pointing horizontally. So it's just like only a little bit underfired, I would say. And then this one, we've got the cone 6 down, and then the cone 7 is also bent horizontally. So this one is fairly overfired. So in a cone 06 bisque firing, I'll use cones 07, 06, and 05. So the 07 would be the guide cone because it starts melting first. 06 would be the target cone, and then 05 is the guard cone. So remember, with our low temperature cones, we start at, they start at like 022 or something, and then as temperature goes up, it's like 07, 06, 05, 04, up to 1, and then it starts 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So the low temperature cones just have a 0 in front of the number, and so you just have to remember that the higher the number, the lower the temperature with these low temperature cones. And the low temperature cones are red because they are fluxed with iron, and that is what gets them melting at this lower temperature. Cones are essential when firing a manual sitter kiln as described before. A manual kiln has no thermocouple or pyrometer to tell you the temperature inside the kiln. Witness cones give you a way to make sure your kiln fires to the right temperature in case your kiln sitter malfunctions, which is very likely to happen at some point, I promise. But even if you have a digital pyrometer, I still recommend putting witness cones in every firing. Witness cones will give you more accurate information about your firing than a digital temperature reading, and this is because of heat work. Okay, so what is heat work? Cones measure heat work as opposed to temperature. Temperature is just a number that tells you how hot something is at a specific moment. Temperature doesn't take into account the amount of time an object has spent at that temperature or the accumulation of temperature over time. Think about cooking something in the oven. You can put a pizza in the oven, turn it on, and heat it to 400 degrees. Maybe the oven takes 10 minutes to reach 400, or maybe it takes an hour. The pizza that takes an hour to reach 400 degrees will be more thoroughly cooked than the pizza that only takes 10 minutes to reach the same temperature. The final temperature in the oven is the exact same in both cases, 400 degrees, but one pizza is barely cooked and the other is well done. The difference between these two examples is heat work. Food needs to spend time at a temperature to cook thoroughly, and so do clay and glazes. The final temperature of a firing tells you nothing about whether the clay has completely matured. It depends on the speed of the firing, specifically the speed at the end of the firing. So if you fire to cone 6 slowly, for example, the final temperature will be lower than if you fire to cone 6 quickly. What's important is that the physical cone 6 is bent and not the final temperature. The cones show you how well done your clay and glazes are. Cones measure the heat work of your clay and glazes. Temperature alone can't give us this information. This is why it's important to put witness cones into every firing. So put witness cones in every firing. This is my advice to you. Witness cones help you troubleshoot, and even if you have no troubles to shoot now, there's a very good chance that one day you will. And if you didn't put witness cones in that one firing that gives you troubles, you'll have a harder time figuring out what went wrong. Many clay and glaze issues are heat work related. You need to know if your clay and glazes were underfired or overfired because you can determine, before you can determine any other cause of a problem. For example, glazes can run because they're overfired or because they're applied too thickly. When I'm unloading a kiln and I notice my glazes have run unexpectedly, the first thing I do is check my cones. If the cones show the kiln has fired accurately and wasn't overfired, there's a pretty good chance that the glaze application was too thick. So next time I glaze, I will adjust my application thickness. Even programmable kilns are never going to be 100% accurate every single firing. If your kiln is tightly or loosely packed, that can affect how long it takes everything to heat up, which affects the final heat work. Remember, heat work is the is the measurement of temperature over time. Programmable kilns can be fairly consistent, but they're not designed to fire over and over again forever without regular maintenance. And witness cones will tell you when your kiln needs attention. When your elements are aging, your firings can take longer or struggle to reach temperature. This will affect your final results, and cones will show you that. When your thermocouples are needing to be replaced, they will become less accurate at reading temperature and your firings will no longer be accurate. Cones will show you this. If your power goes out, which is a regular occurrence where I live on the west coast of Canada, your kiln will shut off. Depending on the type of kiln, it could stay off or turn back on again when the power returns. If the outage occurs at a high enough temperature and the temperature drops significantly and then starts climbing again, this can affect the heat work. So cones will always show you the final result regardless of any ups and downs along the way. Even if it's not convenient to place witness cones somewhere you can see them during the firing, I still recommend putting them in every firing so you can see them when you're unloading the kiln. Every now and then, I'll put a cone pack on every shelf of a firing. This shows me how even the heat work is throughout the kiln, and this can often explain when a glaze turns out differently on different shelves in the same firing. So these are all the cone packs from a large gas firing that we did. And so you can notice the difference, with how much each cone pack is melted. The two bottom left cone packs got much hotter. So these two over here got much hotter than the top two on the left. So, and these are set up kind of the way they were configured in the kiln. So these were on the bottom shelves and then the middle and then the top shelves. So you can see that the bottom of the kiln got significantly hotter than the top of the kiln. And then also the right side of the top got hotter than the left side of the top. So these cones help to explain the varied results that came out of this firing. And what I will often do is when I'm unloading a kiln, I will put the cone pack, like especially in a gas kiln, I'll always put spread cone packs out throughout the kiln because gas firings, like in our kiln, it's often quite uneven like this. And so when I'm unloading the kiln, then I'll put the cone pack next to the pots that were on that shelf so we can kind of see the patterns of the results. If you don't want to use so many cones, you can make single cone packs for your target temp and scatter them throughout the kiln. For example, I make a bunch of single cone 6 cone packs. I'll put a full 3 cone pack visible through the peep, and then I'll put single cone 6s in various places throughout the kiln. When you know where your kiln's hot and cool spots are, you can load your pots strategically. Put the runny glazes in the cooler spots and the glazes that need more heat to look good in the hot spots. I keep a record of how the cones looked after every firing in my kiln log. This allows me to track the health of my kiln. The magic is in the details. If you're not using witness cones in every firing, I encourage you to start. You just never know when you're going to wish that you had them. When you start looking at the cones out of every firing, even when things are going well, you can start to connect slight temperature changes with your glaze results. The magic often lies in the details. Some glazes can be finicky when it comes to temperature. I have a glaze that needs to be fired to where the tip of cone 6 is touching the kiln shelf and cone 7 is just starting to bend. Any cooler and the glaze is flat with no variation. It's just not very exciting. And then any hotter and it's running onto the kiln shelf. So it's very troublesome glaze, but I learned how to fire it strategically by using witness cones. It took me a while to figure out why my glazes were never turning out the same. I kept trying to change my application methods. Then I finally put a cone pack on every shelf and it all made sense. The bottom shelf was slightly cooler than the rest of the kiln, and this particular glaze needed to be fired hotter. I wouldn't have known this without the cones. I started planning my kiln loads so my more versatile glazes are loaded into the bottom and my finicky glaze is loaded into the top. I also make sure that I can see the cone pack through the peephole on the shelf with that finicky glaze. Because as we have seen, the cone packs can look very different from shelf to shelf. So the witness cones that you can see through the peephole are representative of the pots that are on that shelf. I don't let the kiln shut off until that cone pack looks exactly how I want it to. So even if my kiln sitter shuts off, I'm going to turn the kiln back on and wait for the cone 6 to drop because otherwise my glazes won't look how I want them to, and then I'll have a kiln load of pots that I'm not super happy with. Great glaze results equals a happy potter. So, do you put witness cones in every firing? Please let me know in the comments. All right, so we did it. We got through this blog post of witness cones. So if you have any questions, please type them in the comments. Just checking the comments now. Super loud and clear. So I'm glad that we got this all working out well. And then I also have, I'm going to hide this, and I have a little bonus, how to make a cone pack. So I just, I was making cone packs a while ago, and I just took pictures as I was making them. So I'm going to share a different part of my screen with you, and I'm just going to show you how to make a cone pack. Okay, so here we go. Oh, a question. With a programmable kiln, if the temperature fires too hot, how do you determine how much cooler to program next firing? So generally, I like to go a little bit at a time, and I also like to wait for 2 consecutive over firings. So, like if our kiln has been firing fairly consistently, and then all of a sudden it overfires or underfires, I'll usually leave it the same until the next firing. And then over the next firing, if the kiln overfires again, then I'll make an adjustment. And so depending on how much it's overfired or underfired, I usually will come down like 10 degrees, maybe 20 if it's significant. I would say coming down 20 degrees Fahrenheit is going to be, maybe half a cone's difference. But I always do it incrementally, and we're firing several times a week, so it doesn't take me long to kind of fine tune the firings like that. Just checking the comments here. Yeah, and so, but if it's a new kiln, for example, like so that you don't have a pattern with yet, then yeah, I would generally say like I would check the cone chart, like the Orton cone chart, and if your cone 7 is fully bent over, so you're like a full cone over, then I would reduce the temperature by the amount of degrees in between cone 6 and 7 on the cone chart. And then for the next firing, what I would do is I would put the witness cones where I can see them. And even in a programmable kiln, you can do this where you're just watching the cones fall. And so you're making sure that the kiln doesn't shut off before the cones have fallen. And so you can, if it does shut off, then you can always turn it back on. And I usually keep a program the kilns that we use allow for 6 different firing schedules. And so I would kind of keep another program in my back pocket that goes to a higher temperature. And so I can quickly program the new schedule, like in the middle of the firing, if I want to keep the kiln on, and then I'll just be watching the cones, and then I'll shut the kiln off once the cones have fallen. Maribel says she doesn't put them in every firing, but she thinks she will start using them. That's wonderful. I usually use the cones as a double check, a guard cone, in the older ovens because, for example, the timer no longer works and I use an external relay that is controlled by my control unit together with a temperature probe attached to it. Yeah, and it's good to have both if you have the digital reading and the cones, and then you can kind of correspond to each other. But yeah, the cones are temperature times time, and that is how heat work is measured. Okay, you're welcome, Michael. Answered your question. And then now I'm going to go through my how to make a cone pack. So first I will roll a coil about 3/4 of an inch thick here. And then what you want to do, the cones need to be placed at an angle, the same angle that if you place the cone on a flat surface, they're going to sit at a natural angle. And I think it's about 8 degrees off of vertical. I think it says that on the cone box. For some reason, I know that information. So when you place the cone on a flat surface, you can see the angle. And so then when you stick the cone in the clay, you just want it to be at the same angle as if it was on a flat surface. So I always check the angle, and then I stick the cones in, and then I just make sure that the cone in the clay is at the same angle as the cone on the flat surface. And then I do my 3 cone packs. I try to keep them really close together so that I can see all of them through the little peephole. So if they're like super spread apart, then they have to be kind of really far away from the peephole in order to see all of them. So I like to have them like really close together. And then I just cut that off and then make another cone pack. And then I also poke little holes into the clay, which helps even out the drying, because as the clay shrinks around the cone, sometimes the clay can crack. So I just poke a bunch of little holes in there. And there we have a cone pack. And this cone pack, I actually made it backwards. I made a whole set of backwards cone packs. So this one is 07, 06, 05. So the 07 should have been at the front of the line and the 05 should have been at the back. But that's what we do sometimes. We all make mistakes. Michael says, what about firings that don't in fact shut off, but rather slowly cool? Yeah, so if you have a programmed cooling schedule, so if it goes to the next segment, so it reaches its target temperature, and then it goes into the cooling segment, I'm not sure how you would, if it starts going to the cooling segment early, I'm not sure how you would get it to continue to rise, except that maybe reprogram it for the next time. But I know that if your cones start falling and the kiln hasn't shut off yet, so it's about to be overfired, that there's a way that you can push it into the next segment. I can't remember which buttons that you press, but it should be in the instruction manual, because we used to do this at school where we were programming cooling cycles, because I don't program cooling cycles at the kilns at work, but I know it was like you go view segment, enter or something, there's a way that you can skip into the next segment so that it doesn't overfire. So there is a way to do that. Susan says she put her cones backwards at first. Yeah, I mean, I've been doing this for 10 years and I still make these mistakes. And it's the low fire cones, they're all the same color. So you have to pay super close attention to those. So yeah, so Michael, hopefully that answers your question about cooling cycles. And yeah, I think that if it's under fired, it would be tricky to get it to fire hotter and then keep that same cooling schedule, especially if it's already, once it starts cooling, it takes a long time to bring it back up to temperature. So it heats really slowly and then cools really fast, especially at the top at those high temperatures. But then you can just reprogram it differently for next time. And that is the end of my presentation. I'm glad I got it working. Thank you all for your patience with my technology issues. My goal for next Friday is to have my video and audio all working at the same time. And I am taking, if you have any suggestions or requests for the story time for next week, please just let me know. You can write in the comments. The only criteria is that it has to be a blog post that I have written, and I will read it out loud to you. So I'm planning on doing this weekly for the foreseeable future, and then yeah, until I get through all of them. So if you have topics that you want me to talk about, please let me know. Blog posts that you would like me to write. I'm also, I have a couple articles coming out in Ceramics Monthly soon, so stay tuned for that. And they've also, they're going to send me a bunch of topics that they would like me to write articles for them about, so that's super exciting. Voyage says, I never used cones, but now definitely use them. When the cone, oh, I lost your comment. Just a second. Oh, I totally lost the comment that I was just reading. So, oh, here we go. I never used cones, but now definitely use them. When the cone touches the kiln shelf, does it stick to it? No. Well, I use kiln wash, so it doesn't stick to that. It might stick if your cone completely melted. So like generally the lowest temperature cone is completely melted and flat on the surface of the kiln shelf. And so it might stick if you didn't have kiln wash. And so if you don't use kiln wash on your kiln shelves, you could always put the cone on like a little piece of clay. You could just like make a little slab to put the cone on so that it doesn't stick to the shelf. Or like a little chunk. I have like all these broken bits of kiln shelves that I'll often put the cones on. Will these videos be available to view later? Yeah, so this video is going to stay in the Facebook group. So as soon as I finish the live version, then you'll be able to watch the replay. And then I'm also going to upload the video and the audio to my website. So on this blog, the blog post that I read about witness cones, then you'll be able to watch the video. And then I'm uploading the audio to SoundCloud as well. So if you use SoundCloud, you can follow me on there, and then you can always listen like a podcast. That's kind of where I got the idea from this, because I listen to podcasts all day long. So I was like, I would like to be in a podcast. So this is kind of like the way I'm doing it for now until I have more time. You're very welcome. And so I hope you all have a great Friday. And please let me know if you have anything, topics, suggestions for next week. And otherwise, I will let you go. So have a wonderful day, and we'll see you next Friday. Okay, bye.